welcome back. Well, GM is shutting down most of its pickup production for a week thanks to chip shortages that continue to weigh on automakers right now. We're joined now by Garrett Nelson, Senior Equity Analyst at CFRA Research. Garrett, always great to have you here with us. So pickup trucks are really the best sellers for car makers. GM is no exception. What kind of hit do you think revenue-wise this is going to bring to GM for them to halt most of their pickup truck production for a week?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Well, that's what they're saying. It's just going to be for a week, but in our view, it could extend well beyond a week. And it really hurts GM because at the plant that they are idling production in Fort Wayne, Indiana, it produces their two best-selling vehicle models so far this year, which are the Chevy Silverado pickup truck and also the GMC Sierra. So, those vehicles are highly profitable. They really move the needle on the bottom line for GM. So this really hurts. And I think the investor perception has been, GM is doing a better job navigating the semiconductor chip shortages than other automakers. For example, GM's US vehicle sales volume was up 40% in the second quarter. Compare that to Ford, which was only up 10%. So GM had been doing a better job, but I think now the reality is that there are things beyond their control, and they just can't seem to get the chips to produce those vehicles, and so really it's an all hands on deck type situation for both for GM and other automakers. They really need to ramp up their production and kind of ameliorate these supply issues which have been plaguing them, which looks like will extend, well into the second half of this year, perhaps well into 2022 and maybe beyond.
All right, Garrett, you bring up a couple of issues here, and I want to get to some of the other automakers in just a moment. But looking at GM, you're saying that this could last much longer than a week. Curious to know how much longer past the week, or are you guys estimating this might go? And if it does just last the week, are you imagining that perhaps we're going to see repeatedly throughout the remainder of the year GM coming out and saying that they're going to have to idle production in some of their factories, that this is essentially just the beginning of a long cycle of pausing and restarting that production thanks to these chip shortages?
Well, I think we have to take GM at their word for now. So we're only assuming that that plant is down for a week, but the reality is we think there's a very good chance it could extend well beyond a week. And we don't think GM's announcement was the last we've seen from the major automakers. We think there are more announcements to come. And it's really weighed on the stock price performance over the last month or so, because in mid-June, they came out and they guided for much better than expected second quarter. And so there was really a feeling that maybe these issues were getting better, but now it's become clear that the issues are maybe worse than was thought, in mid-June. So I think that's what's really weighed on the stock price. And as I mentioned, it really hurts GM because these are such higher margin vehicles, and in fact, they're diverting some of their chips from some of the lower margin vehicles so they can keep producing some of the higher margin vehicles. So we'll see what happens from here.
Now, you've mentioned other automakers and that they might take similar action. We know that Toyota actually stockpiled chips and for the first time was actually able to beat out GM, at least when it comes to car sales, thanks to that stockpile. But as you're mentioning, Ford not doing as well, at least when compared to GM. Are you imagining that we're going to hear Ford next, perhaps making a similar announcement? And after Ford, what automaker are you looking at that you're saying these guys are also really struggling? If GM needs to idle, so do they.
So Ford has made such announcements, and it's really impacted their production and sales so far this year. I think what's changed is really, a view that this is going to continue, well beyond the first half of the year, and could take several months or several quarters to really work out. These companies are sitting on very, very low inventory levels. If you go to dealerships, There's not a lot of inventory right now. In fact, inventory levels are at record lows, and it start to really hit the bottom line of these companies. So, uh, you know, we, so we're very bearish in the near term as far as the ability for these companies to ramp back up and get back to the production capacity utilization levels that they were running at before the pandemic.
It's also hitting the pockets of consumers that are out there trying to buy used cars and new cars. We've seen a lot of those prices spiking lately. Do you imagine that there's going to be further price hikes, at least for some of these vehicles going forward, as the shortages really continue to weigh on those automakers? Again, as you mentioned, into 2023, perhaps, or excuse me, into 2022. And we heard already from Intel CEO saying that these chip shortages are going to last into 2023.
So there's no question there's been a lot of upward pressure on pricing uh, for both new vehicles and used vehicles. That upward momentum will probably continue in the near term. So, but really looking out 6 months or so, the supply demand situation becomes much less clear. So we can really only have visibility at this point, through the end of the year, and we'll have to, reevaluate how things look, at the end of this year. But certainly inventories are an issue because there's hardly any availability. Pricing has been moving higher. It will continue to move higher, we think, and that's also supported by some of the stimulus. You have the supplemental unemployment checks, which will continue until about Labor Day, and also the child tax credit payments, which is a form of stimulus for U.S. consumers. So you're putting all this cash in consumers' pockets, and that's helping drive up the pricing of autos and many other products, as we know. So we see that continued upward pressure on pricing in the auto market, for the next several months.
All right. Garrett Nelson, Senior Equity Analyst at CFRA Research. Thanks so much for stopping by.